Welcome to the Roniel and DaRon podcast show. I am Roniel,
I am DaRon.
and I always got to start off. But any new movies? Did you see some of the movies I was talking to you about the last week?
Not yet. They're on my to-do list. We have been watching some television shows instead, and still working on Loki.
So what? How far are you on Loki yet?
I I'd have to look to
Oh,
see,
okay.
but without because I don't want to give away details. But I mean, we've certainly watched quite a few episodes up to this point. So
Are you really liking it? Because at first, when I was thinking about a Loki series, I was like, "Who wants to see Loki?" But then it kind of shocked the hell out of me.
I've enjoyed the twists that they put into it, and I've enjoyed the twists that they put into it. I find that his powers or lack thereof, when you'd think you'd have them, and maybe even the quality of his powers is maybe a little more diminished than I would have thought for a god, even if we are talking about the god of mischief. But
Right.
it's been interesting. It's been interesting, and I guess that probably does track to some degree with most pagan beliefs having a large variety and number of gods. They can't all be all powerful.
It was not as bad as I thought. So everybody who sees it, I thought it was going to be pretty bad. But when you see it, you can give us your, thoughts on it down in the comment section. But pretty good, pretty good series.
Yeah, it was. I will say I was a little happy that they didn't just stick with past events. A lot of
Yeah.
times in a show like that, I mean, anyone who's ever seen Doctor Who, my goodness, they like to go to Victorian England.
Oh yeah. Which one did you see? Because there were multiple doctors.
There
Doctor Who.
were, weren't there? I've
Yeah.
actually seen a few spanning across
Okay.
its
Yeah.
lifetime.
Because the one right now, if I'm not mistaken, has the one with the woman.
Yeah, I haven't seen that at all. The
Okay.
introduction that I saw to it was relatively offensive, so I let that one go. It was like that one Batman where they had a it was largely a female character, and she's in there demanding, saying this suit won't be perfect until it fits a woman, and I'm like, but you've done nothing. This doesn't make sense. Why are you running around demanding that when you haven't made it work?
Can we start with the Batmans, please?
Yes,
No
yes,
more
please.
Batman. So many heroes, so many villains. Let's do something different, please.
We've done the same
No
thing with
more.
Superman.
Yes.
Just
Oh my gosh. Stop it.
beating him into the ground.
And it's not as great. Okay. I was okay with Dark Knight. Okay. That was in my opinion, and I've seen every Batman movie, but that was one of my favorite Batman movies. Maybe not everybody's favorite. But this new Batman is coming out. It is just completely trash. I don't want to see it. I just want it to be done. Let it go. No more Batmans. What about Deathstroke?
Yeah.
What about all these other characters? Like, can we get into some of these other people?
Well, and actually, to that point, it's funny because we had there is a big fixation with Marvel, which is largely because Marvel has been driving it, pushing it hard. But there were a lot of other companies that made phenomenal superheroes and characters. I think it would behoove us to, as much as Marvel would probably hate us saying it, but move outside of Marvel and DC's Batman, because it's all that they've had so far is Marvel, Marvel, Marvel. And Marvel, they do have a lot of heroes, but you have ridiculous ones like Ant-Man.
I didn't even like Ant-Man. And the movie was okay, but I was just like, couldn't we just go with somebody else?
Yeah,
You know?
he has the
Like,
power of an ant.
yeah, like, come on. There are so many good superheroes, even in Marvel, that we don't even get to see. Even in
Yeah.
DC, there's some really good ones. And I'm just like, let's move on. And then there are, as you said, there are a lot of nice, cool heroes, villains that are not in the
Yeah.
DCU or MCU. Like, can somebody get out there and do that? Like, can and and first of all, if you're gonna redo Spawn, which was a weird is stuff, can we do it right?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, they're talking about putting out a Spawn movie, which I'm waiting for Spawn, but they're talking about not actually having Spawn do much in it, just have the detective be the main character. I don't want to see the detective. I want to see Spawn. I want to see what he was going through.
Yeah.
You know, like I really like the Spawn a little bit about his backstory. Now there were some issues and complications, but I really would like to see more characters that they have out here, besides the DCU stuff and MCU. Like, come on.
Well, those comments remind me though a lot of like what you saw with X-Men. So X-Men long ago, they didn't have much of a backstory besides maybe the professor and a few other people, and then they started fleshing out Wolverines quite a bit. And then you get like a whole movie series dedicated to Wolverine, which was mostly because a certain group of people were largely swooning over that Australian guy who played Wolverine. Hugh Jackman. There it is.
Hugh Jackman. He's Australian? I didn't even
yeah.
know he was Australian.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You just never know. like in The Walking Dead, like I didn't know those people, like some of them were like from London.
Yes.
The UK. Like, I'm like, wait a minute, they start talking differently. I'm like, whoa, wait, hold on. I didn't even know you like, whoa. It's crazy.
Yes. Well, actually, that is one thing that I think we've started to do very well. Is it's good to see them break out of Hollywood and New York, because that's, New York is where all television was and historically has been as far as the United States is concerned, whereas Hollywood had all your movies. And to see actors and actresses pulled from across the globe is so much better. So much better.
Yeah. So I have to agree. But I need to tell you something I learned.
Yes.
We were talking about something about, and I'm not going to say it specifically, but racism.
Yes.
So I was telling you I was watching Big Bang Theory, and that's one of my favorite shows. So I really was kind of going over watching all of these seasons, and I was trying to watch a season where I was trying to figure out how Penny and Leonard got married and when they got married.
Yes.
Because that was just kind of weird to me, because I went to season 7 or 8, 9, whatever it was, where it was at the end of that season. So I noticed that something we talked about before in other episodes about certain shows or different things or racism that you don't actually notice that they put in there. Like Sheldon seemed very racist. I don't know if you've seen some of the episodes where he called the black lady who was HR, talked about her being enslaved. And he doesn't know that, but there was a lot of racism between there, especially that and Howard on the show. They said a lot of racist things, especially to their friend, especially people from the guy from India. Like I was just like it started to bother me for a minute. I'm like, I love the show and I get it, but I feel like the writers who wrote this knew what they were doing.
Yeah. Well, and so it strikes me funny because we have that gentleman, by the way, Raj.
Yes, Raj. Yeah.
He is married to, if I remember correctly, a beauty queen or something like that. His wife is a big deal in India. I think it was. I'd have to double check that, but and I bring that up just because it is a little abnormal to see someone actually from India in an American anything.
Yeah.
And that was good, but it does beg the question how he felt maybe about some of the comments that were being made. Or it could very well be that to him, he was, you see this all the time. Hey, I'm here representing us, people from India, and I'm just so enthused with the opportunity and all of that good stuff. And by being out there, even if this was actually the same mentality that Louis Armstrong had, he took a lot of flack for being in a lot of movies and things of that nature where he was portrayed negatively. And he sat there and said, we're going to achieve diversity and advancement just by being present. I don't know how well that works or doesn't work. I know that was a mixed bag for Native Americans, because if you look at a lot of the old westerns, they would have usually Apache and Navajo running around on horseback, being, hooting and hollering, which they don't do, not like that.
Right.
And I don't think that advanced Native Americans in any way, especially since we fell off the face of the earth. I mean, yeah, please.
You guys do not exist.
No, we don't exist.
Well,
Oh,
you know what I find even funny, and then we'll get to the topic, but a lot of people think that I'm mixed. And so I remember you were talking about you
yes.
being, yeah, they think you're Arabic, or
Yes.
please, if I'm saying it wrong, please don't get mad at me or flame me.
Yeah.
But Arabic, people think that I'm related to Arabic culture, or I'm from India because of my skin color, and I guess the way I look. And I'm like, I get called this all the time. I'm like, I am not Arabic. Like, I don't even know an Arabic that looks like this, or even an Indian.
Yeah.
But you see the ones in the store on the corner, and they may be a darker color, and you'll think that they even think that I'm a part of it, right? I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm actually black. Are you mixed? I'm not Arabic.
That's funny because I've been to a lot of places and seen a lot of people from a lot of different places. And I completely agree. So I think some of the confusion comes in southern India, for example. They can get extraordinarily dark,
Mm,
like extraordinarily dark, but they look different. The facial features in general, etc. Again, very broadly speaking, look different. And then Omanis, for example, that's on the Arabian Peninsula, on the southeastern corner of it, they also can get very dark. But again, they look different. They also tend to
yeah.
be much shorter.
And
Actually,
that's where I wouldn't understand. And like, I was like, I've had people in my family say that. I'm like, I am not. And then there's people that are Arabic that'll think that I am. And I'm like, no, I'm not.
yeah,
So I don't know where to get it. So it's just weird, just hearing that. But at the same time, it was weird looking at that show and thinking about some of the things we talked about, and just hearing them go back and forth kind of was just like, this is disgusting to me, because they're talking about, slavery, and I'm black. And, then they're also criticizing, people from India. And I'm like, that's kind of bullying. It's like a lot of things in there,
yeah,
that was like, oh, I did not know they were doing this. But it was a really good show. If you look at everything outside of that, it's a great show for nerds. But as a nerd myself, I'm not actually going around telling my friends that, hey, you're this and you suck because you're enslaved people. What? Or you're from, like, doesn't make any sense.
your food must really smell terrible, and you smell bad because of it. I hate
Yeah,
your
and
spices.
it's not a joke either. Like, this is not funny. Like,
Right.
I don't find none of it funny when I look at it, and I'm like, wow. And then I didn't notice it until I was deep in the season. I'm like, wait a minute, this is completely racist. Like, what? This is not cool. But if you look beside that, everything else is okay. Anyways, we want to talk today about GPAs. And go ahead,
I
Ron.
was going to say this works well, actually, topic wise,
Yeah, yeah.
because, so we've heard, or I have heard, and I've seen this written for a number of years now, that if a company restricts their hires and restricts, for example, any resumes that they get based on GPA, saying, for example, we're going to cut it off at 3.0, that they're racist, and that is, in fact, harmful to minorities. This bleeds
Yep.
exactly into what you were saying, because I want to start off by saying, to me, when I hear that, that perturbs me for two reasons. One, because I partially agree, not that it's racist, but that it's silly, and I'll get to why in a second. And two, because they are being racist, especially in how they say it.
Yep.
So part of the reason why I say I agree that you shouldn't put the heavy emphasis on GPA is because I'll tell you, the people I have seen who don't generally do well, period, especially when faced with adversity, so they don't do well in a work environment, are the people who get straight A's always and forever. there are two reasons for that. One, either they took classes that were too easy for them, so they were never challenged, which is how they got straight A's. Or two, they're just not used to failing, which also kind of goes hand in hand with not having been sufficiently challenged. I mean, the class I learned the most from was a class I got a D in. And
yeah, yes. Thank you for saying that. Like, oh my gosh, the ones I got the D in is the ones I learned the most.
Yeah.
Even though like I hated that I got the D in, but there was other reasons. But
I mean, I worked hard throughout college. I had work and a family and all of this other stuff. I had 2 young kids and a wife, and it took a lot of work actually. But I wound up actually, my GPA was, I don't even know what it was. I know it was 3 point something. It was, I think, on the higher end, but I would have to check. But I mostly got A's. And the truth is, I didn't learn much. And in fact, in many cases, I didn't learn anything from the classes I got A's in, to such a strong degree that I stopped my master's program, which I got all A's in, despite only having 2 classes left before I got, my degree, because I wasn't learning anything. And it wasn't useful to me. So the only reason why I started a master's was because I wanted to learn things. I wanted to, I like to learn. I strive to constantly learn more and more and more. And I got tired of paying a large amount of money for no returns. And some people would say, well, but you learn how to write academically. Well, I'd been doing that for some time. So I've already said on this, I am an actual scientist. I do scientific work and I write scientific papers. In fact, I'm on scientific journals. I am an editor for a variety of scientific journals and a peer reviewer for scientific and medical journals. The medical one might sound weird to people, and sometime we can get into more why that is, but it's tied to, of course, some of the work that I've done, but also the fact that medicine so heavily relies on technology these days that you cannot decouple the two. So long and short of it is the classes I did really well in grade wise are the classes I learned nothing, and it was a big giant waste of my time and money. And I got a D in my computer algorithms class. It was honestly my favorite class that I've taken, period. And that's bachelor's, master's, outside of both of those, because I take classes outside of that. And I actually got the D because I failed every test. All the homework was phenomenal. In fact, actually, and I have it written, if anyone ever wants to call me out on it, I have the email and I have it written down. My professor sat there and said he could not understand why. Said when we were in class and having discussions, I offered the most these are his words, the most insightful comments and questions and solutions, things of that nature. My homework was always phenomenal, but every single time I got a test, I mean, I don't know what happened, but it just, and he said he'd never seen a case of test anxiety anywhere near as bad as mine. I got 1 point on one exam because I got my name right.
Listen, me and you are very similar, because I basically just have I think I'm worse than you. That's the reason why I just hate doing exams and certifications, all of them, because I can know it here. I can do it very well. But if you give me a test, it's just out the window. And I'm just like, I suck at it. And I'm just like, I hate them. And it doesn't prove anything. But that's how I was in school for me. It's like,
yes,
I didn't learn anything from the things I had A's in. And they were really easy. And a lot of them were things I did, especially like web development. I mean, come on.
Yes.
Web development, that was just breeze. Everybody else struggling. I'm in there like creating the best site. I've done this before. I've done development. I was doing web development. That's easy for me. But it was the harder courses and some of the courses that I really didn't give a shit about that was like, I learned the most. And I'm like,
Yes.
wait a minute. I learned a lot, even from the ones I had C's or D's.
Yes.
and I didn't get as many, but it was still like those are the ones I kind of really learned a lot from. And like you said, the ones that had A's, they were whatever. I didn't learn shit. And then
Yeah,
more likely they didn't even know what they were talking about. So it's like a
that's
breeze.
true. That's true. And I mean, like I took a class on computer and network security, for example. I mean, that class it was so ridiculously easy. And it was funny because I actually tried taking it when I was a freshman in college for my bachelor's degree. And they forced me to drop it because they said, "Oh, no, there's no way you could do this. Is a master's." It was a master's level class, master's and PhD. This is a master's level class. You can't be taking it. You'll be blown out of the water. The class was ridiculously easy. I mean, I got an A on the first exam, and then they made me drop it. And I didn't have to study for it because I'd been doing this for years for the military at that point, and for years for the federal government. So it was a bit of a joke. And then I go back to my master's, take the class again, got an easy A, didn't learn anything. And
Can I briefly ask you, DaRon, just a question about your network security course? Was it more of a programming course or more of the Cisco route or the networking, how parts come together type stuff, or how they communicate?
okay, so I had a networking class in my bachelor's that was writing actual servers and clients for the different networking protocols.
Okay.
But prior to that, I had done CCNA, so I'd already
Okay.
had that side of it. And then in the master's level, I'll say this for anyone who doesn't know. At the master's level, everything is like the 3,000 foot range. So it's so high up that you don't even see the material per se, not in any detail. And it's even worse for the PhDs. But as a result, you'll get people who go and they get a non-computer science or non-STEM degree for their bachelor's, and then they go off and they get a master's in a STEM field, enter STEM, whatever it happens to be. So STEM, of course, is science, technology. Oh my goodness.
Engineering.
Electric, yeah, engineering. Thank you. Science, technology, engineering, mathematics. There we go. And all I could think of was electrical engineering, and I'm like, it's not that. It's not that. But they then enter into that STEM field, and it's a huge shock for them because they don't know anything to do their job, because these organizations say, oh well, he or she has a master's in this STEM field, so they would be perfect as a senior or lead developer or lead engineer, whatever it happens to be. And the person doesn't have the skills and knowledge to do that because they didn't get that foundation. And I think that's a disconnect between universities and, of course, everyone else. But I mean, I don't want to say, oh well, you can't switch over. Some people do, and they do a phenomenal job. It's just if you do go off and get a master's in something other than what your bachelor's was, completely different field, make sure you take some of those foundational classes, or at least go out of your way to get that foundational education, because you're not going to get it in a master's program. It will not exist. I mean, I didn't do any programming in my computer science master's program.
Hell, I barely did any programming in my bachelor's. I mean, we did, but it was just used as a tool. And that's why in a later course I want to talk about, or in episode, want to talk about the difference between the computer science degrees and an actual science degree, because a lot of people don't know the difference between them. But we'll get to that later. But back to the GPA field, I just kind of wanted to know what the difference were on yours and talk to you about that more.
Yeah, so for me, I well, let me go through and say real quickly, you'll have people go through and say, statistically, Asians get 3.4, whites get 3.2.
And black suck.
People, well, I think they say Hispanics get maybe 3.0 or 2.
Here's my problem. They don't understand that. Like when I was telling people as we discussed, and I want to get this off my chest real quick. As I, for me, somebody who's I've had a rough childhood, but there's two sides to me. But just say my nerdy side, okay? That I've basically always never felt that I was challenged enough in some ways, so I wouldn't apply myself.
Yeah.
I just because I had a 1 point or this and that in high school, I didn't really, especially when you come from being somebody who's have a nerdy side or has to be a certain way because your parents pushes you that way or your grandparents push you that way, and then you're the nerdy person or you're the one to get good grades and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that. I don't want to get good grades. I want to be the cool guy. Then you start looking into the factor you don't want to apply yourself because you're chasing other things. So in high school, I didn't.
Women.
People would think, yeah, women in general being the coolest guy in the school,
Right.
which you don't want to do that. So I didn't apply myself. So everybody looked at me in high school as the coolest kid. I had all the women and all of that, and it's great. And I say, well, I wasn't stupid. And also some of the work we were doing wasn't challenging. I found it boring. I spent my time drawing in classes from the time I was in, kindergarten on up. And they thought I was slow. I even had, and it's funny, I even had a counselor tell me that I was not smart enough to go to any of the top schools or any of those things. And I wouldn't be able to do engineering. I wouldn't be a scientist. I wouldn't be able to do anything. And I should just not even go through that and just stick to just, going to get a regular job. And I was like, wow. Or go to Tri-C. That's the only way I'm going to make it. And to this day, I look back and I was like, right, community college. And he was totally wrong. And then when I got into college, I was getting 3.0s, 3.5s, 3.6, 7s. I was on the dean's list. I was doing great. Then I get out of college. I'm making a good amount of money. I'm doing good things, doing what I like. And then I have people that come back to me that was in high school that were smart, looking at me and they're not doing the same thing. And they're looking at me like, man, I didn't know you were that smart. You didn't know that because you only saw what you saw and you thought that I was an idiot because I didn't apply myself or things wasn't really intruding to me or valuable. And with my mindset, if it's not vital or valuable, I don't care. So I just think that that's not a mark. You shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Just because, some blacks or a lot of blacks, a majority of blacks make a 1.0 or 2 doesn't mean that they're dumb.
Yeah. Well, and to me, I also find it insulting because what they're really saying, what I hear them say, and this is the same as with affirmative action, which is what we're really talking about here, is you, Roniel, you're too stupid to compete and compare on an even playing field with your white colleagues or Asian colleagues. And Asian is weird too because, people from India versus people from Korea, China, Japan, why are they all clumped together when they have very different philosophies? But also what you're really doing is you're comparing immigrants who came to this country almost exclusively as professionals. And so they then make their children work hard to the standard population. And this is important. When you talk about Asians, you're talking about professionals, your doctors and things like that, people studying to be doctors and things like that. So they had to have had good enough grades and money already to come over here and all this other support. But you're also then talking about their children. Well, it is a plain and simple fact that people who have a fair bit of wealth and are well educated tend to have well educated children because that's what's important to them. To the parents ensure that their kids are well educated, and so it perpetuates, although it kind of peters out after a little while, but it does perpetuate through the generations. And what that means is when you take this analysis, first of all, you're talking about a very small population. The Asian population in the United States is incredibly tiny. It's bigger than Native Americans, but it's still incredibly tiny. And with a tiny population, comparing it against a very large population, any swings, and this is basic statistic, any swings actually are greatly amplified. So if, for example, we happen to have a great example, so Native Americans, right? So we talked before, more Native Americans die per capita at the hands of police than any other racial group in the United States. Okay, but remember, including people like me, so people who are mixed, we make up less than 3% of the US population. So you kill one of us, and it's like killing a lot of almost any other group, right?
Yeah. That's crazy.
Right. So the same thing happens here. If Asians happen to be a very tiny percentage of the population, and they're mostly professionals who are well educated, so their children are, for each and every one of them that goes through and gets that education, it greatly accentuates that difference between the Asian population and, say, the normal population. And that's why statistically you're not supposed to take non-random samples and compare them against each other. And the second you start categorizing them by race, it's no longer random. It's not.
Yeah.
And all of this stuff winds up getting real mucked up real quickly. And this is part of the problem, is you can play a lot of different games with statistics. And realistically, the statistic that should matter is that more women are going to college than men right now, and men also are more likely to drop out. Period.
Yep.
So it from a GPA perspective, I don't think you should pick someone just because they have a 4.0. And this is colleges trying to pick people from high school, and it's also jobs trying to, or I guess companies and organizations trying to pick people from college, because I would ask myself, was that person, truly challenged? And yes, there are some people who are truly challenged and manage to eke out with a 4.0. I wouldn't be biased against them, but I would definitely make sure that what's going on is that the individual was rigorously challenged and they weren't just slacking. And I definitely wouldn't say, well, I'm not going to accept a 3.2 because blacks on average only get 2.8 to 2.6 GPA. I mean, again, that's insulting. I mean, they're just calling you stupid is what they're really saying. And they're calling me stupid when they sit there and say the same thing about people like me. I in general had phenomenal grades in college. My GPA is very good. In high school, I had phenomenal grades. And I only got straight A's a couple of times in high school. I didn't see a reason to get straight A's every single time, and so I rather instead pick classes that were interesting or hard, or I took Latin for 4 years, I think it was 3 or 4 years.
I don't know. Like, even with SATs and ACTs and stuff like that, like I said, my thing go back to don't judge a book by its cover. Yeah. Just because I don't get straight A's doesn't mean that I can't get straight A's. And right. I got straight A's a couple of times myself in school, but like just because I don't get it doesn't mean I can't. And then that doesn't mean that I'm not smart. There's a lot of people, as I was saying before, that didn't complete college, didn't have the best grades, and they're the most successful people you've ever meet. And some of them came from money, but I'm saying that the people that didn't, and they actually, worked their way through. And the ones that, to me, the ones I look at are like I'll give an example. I used to teach in college. I used to have the study group because it was like, and it was weird because it was like, if you ever noticed in college, you had the Indians who band together and they worked together, even though they copied off each other.
Right.
The black or African Americans, they were pretty much, and I give this thought, they didn't really work. They were more slackers. They didn't really work, or sometimes they didn't understand what they were getting into. So I had a study group where I would help everyone, but it was mainly a lot of black people that would come to the study group and work with me. And some of them I thought were really smart. I didn't understand why they would come to the study group to work with me, and I was helping them. And I told you about that one case, and I was like, I don't understand. Like, I thought you were the smartest person in the world. But you start to notice that, like I said, some of those people who had C's were the ones that were really working hard.
Right.
Were really trying. But there were other cases in that might have had some issues with that. But those would be the ones that I would look at because they knew how to fail and to continue to get back up.
Right.
The ones that had the A's were the ones that I would just look at and be like, oh, you're going to have a real big problem, because the first time they get nothing in the A, everything is over with. That is like my sister. She, as soon as she gets nothing less than something, she just destroyed.
Right.
And she can't function. And my thing is, you can't look at that way. Like I said, the reason why I would get C's in some of the classes because my teacher was like, "Oh, you didn't do encapsulation on a program. I'm gonna dock you 5 points. Oh, you didn't do such a this, or I like what you did, but I really wanted this." And it was preference. So literally, I could have got a B and A, like no matter what I did. So my thing is here that you should not judge a GPA based on race.
Yes. Yes. And I'm sorry I didn't think I needed to tell people this, but I don't need a leg up just because of my race. It doesn't make me less than, it doesn't make me stupid. And this whole, well, but if you're black or Hispanic, you're more likely to work a job, and that could also be why their grades are, no, you don't need to come up with excuses for us. If you want to know why I got a D in a class, I got a D in one class, and I got that D because I failed every test. I mean, that was it. And that was the best class I ever took. I loved the teacher. I loved the class. And if anyone's curious, you can't work on the systems I work on and write code for systems that I write code for if you aren't good at algorithms. So, and if you ever want to see my code, you can see I'm very good at algorithms. I just can't take tests. And that plagued me throughout college, actually. That was a little hard. I struggled in classes where it was largely test based. I struggled every time, and it has nothing to do with my ancestry. My ancestors aren't just a bunch of, I mean, maybe they are, but they aren't just a bunch of bad test takers. It is quite literally just, I just can't take tests. I don't know why. My brain just, it doesn't do it.
I am a horrible test taker, but I am smarter than you think, and I'm just horrible at taking tests, and that's why I just hate them.
Yeah.
And I would always be surprised when I'd ace a test. I'd be like, wait a minute, I aced a test? The worst tester in the world. And look, I could prepare for days, and I'll sit there and prepare everything, and then get to the test, be sweating, and I'm like, oh God, I'm going to, oh man, okay, I got to do this right. And then be like, wow, I aced this test. I didn't think I was going to ace this test. And then the ones that you're confident that you're going to pass, those be the ones you be like, oh, I did horrible, and I knew I was going to pass that.
That's so true. That's so true. I had only one time, because I follow that a very similar trend. I had only one time where that wasn't the case, and that was we had this one class where, again, I mean, I had no problem with the homework. I had no problem in discussions. I did well in every aspect except tests. And it's almost the end of the semester, and he hands out this exam to people. And this was the only time I've ever had this on a test, where I don't know, I was like in the zone. I was done in 5 minutes. I handed him, and I was usually the guy who was like sitting there till almost time. I handed it in. No one else.
I am like the last guy in the room, and I'm like sitting there, and I'll keep going. And this is another problem with me. I'll keep going over my answers and answers.
Right.
And it's like, oh, okay, well, got to give it in. I'm the last one out.
Right. Well, and in this case, I mean, I leave. I go to turn in my paper, and the professor looks at me. He's like, "Is there something wrong?" "No, I'm done." It's like, okay then. And I leave, and it was a small class, so he knew me well. I leave. I waited because I was waiting for someone else to come out, who I would walk with to the next class, and I waited, and it was almost the end of class before the next person came out. And he's like, "Oh, that exam was the hardest so far." I was like, "What are you talking about? That exam was so ridiculously easy." Everyone in the class had just thought I gave up and walked out. And I got 100%. The only one in that class. The only time I ever got 100% on a test in that class. It just, I don't know why, but everything, I saw it. And this was the first time everything actually clicked. Usually when I get a test, So, I mean, I took AP English, AP US History, AP Government. And actually, I got fives and scored very well on those. And, I have a lot of certifications and things of that nature. But what always happens is I go and I sit down and I read the question and I'm like, if it's multiple choice, I'm either left going, well, none of these are right or all of them are right, depending on which way it goes. And that's question after question after question. And you'll see me, like, I was my AP US government and US history teacher hated, but I'd sit there and I'd start crossing parts of the questions and answers off and then rewrite portions of it and then select an answer based on that. And he's like, you can't do that on the exam. And I'm like, they're all wrong. What are you, it's not my fault. All of these are wrong. He's like, no, you have to learn how to sit there and take it given what they had. You have to choose the best answer. I'm like, they're all wrong. What do you mean the best answer? There is no good answer. They're all wrong. I felt the same way for the CISSP and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's how I felt. A lot of the questions that they give you and the answers were not right.
Yeah.
And it didn't make any sense. So when I thought that it should be a different answer a certain way, then I would have an issue because they were right. And that's the same way. And I'm glad I'm not the only one, because I would do that on exam, especially the GWAP exam. Not giving anything out, but I'm just saying that there were certain things I was like, this is not right. This doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, it was hard trying to pick an answer because I'm like, none of them are right.
Yes. Yes.
And then the answer that they give you that's supposed to be the right answer, I'm like, that's wrong. That's not how this works. Like,
yes.
Who wrote this?
Yes. that is exactly right. That is exactly right. And in the future we'll talk about, because I've actually sat on the boards creating exam questions, reviewing exam questions for some of these certifications. And I mean, I had the same struggle both taking them and creating questions and then reviewing them. Creating them, I didn't have a problem, but then everyone would sit there and a lot of times my questions would get turned down and they'd say, well, there's too much stuff here. And I'm going, that's the only way. I had one that I created that was tied to non-repudiation. And I sat there and was like, okay, well, they have cameras on the doors, they have badging system, they have cameras in the halls, cameras on the computers, they monitor computers. You have to badge into your computer, all this other stuff. And because that's the only way you can get any real bit of non-repudiation. And then the reviewer who reviewed mine, then tried to gut it and reduce it in size because he only wanted 2 or 3 sentences. And I'm like, you can't do that because this is no longer non-repudiation. Because once you remove all of those things, now you take me to court over me having changed something in the system and I'll be like, it wasn't me. I wasn't on the computer at the time. Well, your smart card was logged in. I guess I forgot to pull it out. I guess I forgot to lock my screen. I wasn't in the building. I was in the bathroom. I was outside. I was in my car. I hadn't logged in at all today. Someone must have spoofed my smart card. I mean, it's ridiculously easy to grab the credentials and then anyway, that is one of my biggest complaint about a lot of these certifications. Whereas if you gave me something free form, then I'm much more likely to succeed. Anytime where I'm allowed to write and explain it, I usually do well on the exam. Not always. The algorithms class was all explanation. Every time I saw the exams, I mean, I can't even tell you anything about any of the exams. I blanked hard on all of them.
Well, either way, we will have an episode about certification and what we think about them and even other things in the future. However, the main thing we want to harp on is that you shouldn't, again, judge a book by its cover, and you should be judged by your GPA, no matter what race you are, because everybody's smart in their own way, no matter whether you're smart at this particular subject or something that you decided to pick. Everybody has something that they're good at, and doesn't mean your GPA to determine who you are and whether you deserve that job. So that's my thought about this. What are your thoughts, DaRon?
I completely agree. If you really want to know whether or not someone's a good candidate, GPA isn't necessarily the way to go. Now, I do agree maybe if they're below a 3.0,
Yeah.
Because there's a difference between taking a few classes that really challenge you and getting an average of C, C plus, C minus, or below. And remembering that 3.0 is an average of a B, I mean, I wouldn't dance too far below that, but I can't reiterate enough. Just because Roniel's black doesn't mean he's stupid, doesn't mean his GPA is low, and it doesn't mean you have to sit there and get rid of basic checks for GPAs just because he's black and just because I'm me. I'm mestizo. Yeah. I'm not dumb, and I don't need you telling me that you have to sit there and adjust everything or adjust my SAT scores. My SAT scores, I was 99 percentile on SAT and ACT, and I'm a terrible test taker. But, you don't have to sit there and adjust my numbers because of my race. You don't have to adjust his numbers because of his race. He's not stupid. And that's what I hear when I hear people say that, especially when they give that as an argument. And that's like saying, oh, well, most black people are criminals, so we should get rid of the criminal system.
Right.
He's not a criminal just because it's racist in another direction. You're still being racist.
I'm a criminal because I have dreads. Yeah. I mean, that happens all the time. But like I said, it as you said, I agree with you on that. Anything below that, then you still have to take a hard look. But it would be more a question on why.
Right. Exactly.
I know some really good engineers that may have a 2.6 and 2.7, and they're great and phenomenal, but things were just hard for them, or they didn't take tests well. But again, it's some things you have to question. But
completely agree.
Do not judge people by their GPA. Really get to know them. Really ask questions. Figure out why, how things were, what courses they took, what challenged them, what didn't, and then you can kind of come up with your conclusion from there. But this would conclude our episode for today. I am Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel, subscribe, leave comments for any other topics you like. If you like this episode, let us know. Other than that, we'll see you to the next episode.
Have fun.
All right. Later.